Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. President Donald Trump suggested his efficiency department should review subsidies received by Elon Musk's companies, including Tesla, to save the government big money, according to reports. Thailand's constitutional court has suspended Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra, and she has said publicly that she accepts her court-ordered suspension amid an ethics probe. The move plunges Thailand into a new turmoil only after months she took office. South Africa has asked the Trump administration to delay July 9 tariff hikes threatening exports, with Trade Minister Parks Tau warning 35,000 jobs could be lost. According to reports, Pretoria seeks lower duties and is offering to buy US LNG in return. Indonesia's exports jumped 9.68% in May, driven by palm oil and steel as companies rushed shipments ahead of Trump's July 9 tariff deadline, while imports rose 4.14%, boosting the trade surplus to $4.3 billion, according to reports. Russia's military advance in Ukraine accelerated for a third straight month in June, marking its largest gain since November, according to AFP's analysis. Meanwhile, media reports show the Russian military has seized 588 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory in June. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was seen honoring flag-draped coffins of soldiers killed while supporting Russia in its war against Ukraine. According to South Korea's defense ministry, this revelation further fuels concerns over Pyongyang's direct involvement in the conflict. Hong Kong leader John Lee defended the city's security laws and economic ambitions in the 28th anniversary of its return to China, even as critics and the EU warned of eroding freedoms and rule of law, as opposition parties continue to disband amid growing political pressure. Suspected jihadists have launched coordinated attacks on 7 military sites across Mali, including an army camp in the key western city of Kais, the Mali military has said, as the country faces a sharp rise in militant violence. In Washington, top U.S. trade officials are now pushing for narrow deals with key allies as President Donald Trump's July 9 tariff deadline approaches, according to the Financial Times. These limited agreements would allow participating countries to avoid harsher reciprocal tariffs, though a 10% levy would still apply while talks on deeper issues continue. The administration is said to be seeing agreements in principle on a select number of trade disputes before that deadline. So far, only a limited deal with the UK has been finalized. For others, President Trump has threatened to simply send out notices informing nations of their new tariff rates if deals aren't reached. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned that the threat of rising tariffs is very real and that time is running out. The administration is also considering targeted tariffs on strategic sectors if no progress is made. Trump, however, has suggested that the July 9 deadline could shift, telling reporters it could be earlier or later than expected. The White House and Commerce Department have yet to comment on the Financial Times report, and Reuters has been unable to independently verify its details. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Ross Feingold, he's a political risk analyst, joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Ross, what more can you tell us about the situation with the U.S. And this news that I just read out? What progress can we maybe expect from this?
One thing that we've known all along during the few months of Trump's presidency with regard to trade policy is that it would be very challenging for the administration, the Trump administration, to negotiate deals with all of the trading partners within a short period of time. That's not because the U.S. doesn't want to. The Trump administration does want to negotiate deals with America's trading partners, but the issue is simply a resources constraint. And again, we knew this all along. There's only so many countries that the US side can negotiate with simultaneously. Even though there's three people leading up these negotiations, some countries are dealing with the Treasury Secretary, some countries are dealing with the Commerce Secretary, and some countries are dealing with the Trade Representative's office. But again, there's only so many hours in a day. There's only so many people available on the US side. So I think because of resources constraint, it's been difficult for other countries to reach a deal with the United States. And that's why we see a lot of talk now about maybe reaching limited deals or even delays in the implementation of the reciprocal tariffs.
And now Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has warned that the threat of rising tariffs is very real. How serious is this threat towards, and which countries is this threat towards, is if we can maybe project?
It's certainly a real threat. Whether or not the U.S. grants extensions beyond the upcoming deadline is up to one person. That's President Trump, and we don't know how President Trump feels about that. And he will probably wait until the last day to make decisions. So it's probably safer for countries to assume that they're going to be hit with higher tariffs than to assume they won't be, unless they're able to reach some kind of interim agreement with the United States in the coming few days before the deadline. It's a bit hard to predict which countries might face the higher tariffs. I think the European Union, though, that seems to be a target for President Trump, and they need to be prepared for higher tariffs.
Thank you, Ross Feingold. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Iran says it is willing to renew nuclear talks with the United States, but only after receiving solid guarantees that Washington won't launch military attacks during negotiations. Speaking to CBS News, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said we must first ensure that America will not revert back to targeting U.S. militarily. Only then can we consider re-engaging in talks. This comes in the wake of a 12-day armed conflict between Iran and Israel, followed by U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Araghchi asserted Iran had proven its ability to defend itself and warned that any further aggression would be met with force. Despite tensions, Iran maintains that diplomacy remains possible, with Araghchi stating the doors of diplomacy never slam shut. He emphasized that Iran's peaceful nuclear program is a source of national pride and glory, and no amount of bombing can erase its technological capabilities. Tehran has consistently refused to abandon uranium enrichment, stating it is vital to its peaceful nuclear ambitions and sovereign rights under international law. Now we go back to our discussion with Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, has the recent Iran-Israel conflict made a peaceful resolution to the nuclear standoff more difficult or more urgent, according to you?
It's definitely more difficult, but it is also more urgent. The interesting thing about the remarks from Iran's foreign minister that he wants this guarantee from the United States that the United States won't attack Iran's nuclear sites again. This is really up to the Iranians more so than it's up to the Americans, because the only guarantee the United States could give would be to say, we won't attack you as long as your nuclear program is for peaceful purposes only. The fact remains that Iran has taken a lot of actions that leaves a doubt in the minds of the United States as well as Israel and frankly other countries as well as the IAEA, that Iran's nuclear program seems to be geared not only for civilian energy use, but also to produce nuclear weapons. And as long as Iran continues to take steps towards building nuclear weapons or developing nuclear weapons, And the United States and Israel are not going to give up the military option if they have to use it again. And if they have to use it again to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, they will use it again. And Iran knows that. So it's good that he's saying that they're open to diplomacy, but his request for a guarantee might be unrealistic.
Thank you, Ross, for joining us. You will stay with us for our next news as well. More than 14 million people, including over 4.5 million young children, could die because of drastic U.S. foreign aid cuts under President Trump's administration. That's the alarming warning from new research published in The Lancet today, as world leaders gather in Spain for urgent talks on saving global aid programs. The study says the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, which once funded over 40% of global humanitarian work, has been slashed by over 80%. Health experts say the funding loss could trigger a crisis on the scale of a pandemic or even a major war. Until this year, USAID provided more than 40% of all humanitarian funding globally. A study looking back at data from 133 countries found that USAID funding prevented more than 91 million deaths between 2001 and 2021. But now the Trump administration says these cuts are needed to remove wasteful spending. The cuts have also triggered other major donors, including Germany, the United Kingdom, and France, to announce reductions in their aid budgets. Millions of families who rely on this aid now fear losing basic health care and food supplies. Humanitarian groups are calling on rich countries to protect these life-saving funds. As funding dries up, the world is watching to see who, if anyone, will step in to fill the gap. Now we go back to our guest, Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei for this discussion. Ross, thank you for staying with us. Now, is the Trump administration right to call this spending wasteful, or does this research show that cutting aid could cost far more in the long run? Do these dramatic cuts to U.S. foreign aid risk creating a humanitarian catastrophe?
It's probably both. I think it's fair to say that there is a lot of bureaucratic and wasteful activities that occur within the international aid space. I think the aid providers would acknowledge that as well, or the NGOs that are involved. I think the United Nations would acknowledge that. The World Health Organization would acknowledge that. And yes, it's highly likely that reductions in U.S. Foreign aid and humanitarian aid are going to result in worse health outcomes, people starving in areas where there's famines, and other negative outcomes. But we have to deal with the reality. And the reality is President Trump has decided on this policy, and that's just the way it's going to be for the next 3.5 years. Maybe a future U.S. president will resume a larger amount of foreign aid, but it's not going to happen under the Trump administration. So during this period, it's really going to be up to other wealthy countries to step in and fill the gap. That could be countries in Europe. It could be countries in the Middle East, which are very wealthy. It could also be China as well. China certainly has shown its willingness over the past 20 years or so to use its soft power, especially in places like Africa.
Thank you, Ross. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Taiwan's military has confirmed it will be prepared for any threats from China during its major Han Kuang military exercises this month. Speaking at a news conference in Taipei, a senior defense official has said combat-ready troops will be on duty around the clock if the Chinese Communist Party acts provocatively during the drills. Taiwan will respond immediately, deploying patrol aircraft, reconnaissance teams, and ground forces. The Han Kuang drills, starting July 9th, will last 10 days and mobilize more than 22,000 reservists, the largest mobilization to date. Alongside the military exercises, civil defense drills will be held, including missile alerts and evacuation drills that could temporarily close businesses and stop traffic in major cities. including Taipei. Taiwan's leadership says the exercises are designed to demonstrate the military's determination and capability to defend the island. Officials added that any escalation by Beijing would trigger an immediate and strong response, ensuring public safety and territorial security. Here's what the head of Taiwan Defense Ministry Joint Combat Planning Department has commented.
若是中共在我们演习期间会有挑衅的行为，那我们一样会按照经常战备时期突发状况处置规定，还有战备规定，会长时24小时都会有战备兵力在轮值，所以第一时间都会以战备兵力来做应处，包含载空机或是侦巡舰以及地面的战备部队来快速的执行立刻应处。
Now we're joined by Ross Feingold for this discussion. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Since you are in Taipei, can you tell us more about how are people over there reacting to this? And is this very, very serious? Are people also taking it serious? And how is media covering this news over there?
The fact is, most people don't pay attention to this. Only people who are directly involved, whether that's people in the military who will be part of the exercises, reservists who might be recalled to military duty, or the small number of members of the public who are participating in some of the civil defense drills. But generally speaking, most people will treat this as a nuisance because there will be 30 minutes where people cannot be outside on the streets. So if you're walking on the sidewalk, or if you're in your vehicle, you're going to have to pull over. You're going to have to get off the sidewalks and take cover indoors somewhere. And that will have an effect on people's movements. But otherwise, the truth is, and I'm sorry to say this, but I have to be honest, most people don't pay attention to this, so it doesn't really affect them. And the media will cover this as one among many stories that the media covers on a daily basis. But if the question is whether or not the media gives this an unusual amount of coverage, the answer is no.
Thank you very much, Ross, for joining us today and sharing your expertise as a political analyst throughout our news. Now we move on to our next news. Thailand's Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra has been suspended from duty by the country's constitutional court. The ruling came on Tuesday as the court accepted a petition alleging Paetongtarn breached ethical standards in a diplomatic spat with Cambodia. The controversy centers around a leaked phone call in which Paetongtarn referred to Cambodia's former leader as uncle and criticized a Thai military commander, drawing fierce backlash from conservatives and prompting a coalition party to withdraw. Her approval ratings have plunged to just 9%, and thousands protested her government over the weekend. A deputy prime minister from her Pheu Thai party is expected to temporarily take over. The court suspended her with immediate effect, pending the final verdict, a process that could take months. Let's listen in to what she has said.
ผลคำวินิจฉัยออกมาแล้วนะคะดิฉันก็ขอน้อมรับนะคะคำพิจารณาของศาลนะคะแล้วก็ต่อจากนี้ก็จะมีได้หยุดปฏิบัติหน้าที่ใช่ไหมคะประมาณระยะเวลาน่าจะไม่แน่ใจเหมือนกันแต่ว่ามีเวลาประมาณ15วันที่จะชี้แจงนะคะก็ดิฉันเองก็จะทำให้เต็มที่นะคะในการที่จะบอกความตั้งใจที่แท้จริงนะคะว่าเรื่องของคลิปเสียงที่หลุดออกมาว่าความตั้งใจเจตนาจริงๆเกิน 100% เนี่ยว่าดิฉันตั้งเพื่อรักษาไว้ซึ่งอธิปไตยของเราเพื่อรักษาไว้ซึ่งชีวิตของกองทัพของทหารทุกๆคนเพื่อสันติภาพนะคะที่จะเกิดขึ้นในประเทศของเรานะคะดิฉันมั่นใจในสิ่งนี้มากๆที่แท้จริงนะคะว่าเรื่องของคลิปเสียงที่หลุดออกมาว่าความตั้งใจเจตนาจริงๆเกิน 100% เนี่ยว่าดิฉันตั้งใจทำเพื่อประเทศชาติพี่น้องคนไทยทุกๆคนที่รู้สึกไม่สบายใจกับเรื่องนี้หรือรู้สึกโกรธเคืองนะคะ
In a separate but symbolically linked development, Paetongtarn's father, former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra, appeared in a Bangkok court on Tuesday to face charges under Thailand's harsh royal defamation laws. Thaksin, who returned last year after 15 years in exile, was previously jailed for graft but received a royal pardon. If convicted in this case, he could face up to 15 years in prison. Observers say the combined setbacks mark a crucial moment for the Shinawatra family, long at odds with Thailand's royalist and military establishment. Meanwhile, China has responded cautiously to the suspension of Thai Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra, calling it an internal matter. A spokesperson from Beijing has said that this is Thailand's internal affair and I will not comment on it. But as a friendly neighbor, we hope that Thailand will maintain stability and development. Let's listen into what Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning has said.
这是泰国的内政，我不做评论。但是作为友好邻邦，我们希望泰国保持稳定和发展。
Now we are joined by Joshua Barnes. He's a correspondent at NewsX World. He's be joining us for this discussion. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this highly sensitive and rapidly evolving situation in Thailand and Shinawatra family situation?
Well, yes, absolutely, Asuma. Of course, we've heard their responses from Paetongtarn Shinawatra herself and also a Chinese spokesperson. But I want to take this back now, and this really is a moment of instability for a family which ultimately, barring a short gap, has ruled over Thailand for around 2 decades. The Shinawatra family, Thaksin, of course, the head of that himself, Prime Minister as well. This family have been ruling over Thailand themselves, billionaires and extremely wealthy, facing difficult situations including military coups and also political and court challenges. But this really is a signal of a move that Paetongtarn Shinawatra may be regretting. That leaked conversation that was taking place with the former ruler of Cambodia, an important figure, and in the face of recent uncertainty and border relations that have been strained, leading to a small firing and deaths along the border as well. Approval ratings of Paetongtarn have dropped in recent months, going from over 30% in March now, as you mentioned already, to below 10%, and this for somebody who has only been in power for 10 months herself. It will be extremely difficult now that the Constitutional Court has backed this motion that was presented by 36 senators looking for the suspension. There will be a lengthy process that is expected. For the moment now, the Deputy Prime Minister is in caretaker charge while that Constitutional Court pause and ruling on the Prime Minister, Paetongtarn Shinawatra, has come into force. It will be interesting to see if the Shinawatra family can recover. They've overfaced adversity in the past, as I've mentioned, military coups and other court action. But Thaksin himself, as you mentioned as well, is facing 2 separate court actions. So this could be a shifting in the tide of control in Thailand, and although China said it's an internal matter, there could be wider ramifications. Thailand, part of the ASEAN nations, of course the recent ASEAN summit, key and pivotal to Chinese movement. They're looking at a world with Donald Trump and his tariff action, and looking at closer neighbours as potential trading partners. Also Cambodia, as I mentioned, a country where there has been conflict, and Myanmar is close by as well. So one we will keep an eye on, and one that we will continue to cover.
Thank you very much, Joshua, you will stay with us as we move on to our next news. In Azerbaijan's capital, Baku, police have raided the offices of Russia's state-funded news outlet Sputnik. According to reports, officials have said that the outlet was operating illegally after losing its accreditation in February this year. During the raid, masked officers arrested staff members, including Sputnik, Azerbaijan's editor-in-chief and director. Russia has condemned the arrests, calling them illegal detentions of Russian journalists. According to Russian media, Azerbaijani ambassador to Russia, Rahman Mustafayev, was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry in downtown Moscow. Reportedly, the diplomat left the building without any comment for journalists after spending nearly an hour in the Foreign Ministry. Azerbaijan's raid comes after a deadly incident last week in Russia's Yekaterinburg city. Russian police raided homes of ethnic Azerbaijanis There, 2 brothers were killed and 9 others detained. Family members say the men were beaten, tortured with electric shocks, and treated like animals. Moreover, officials claim the raids were linked to a long murder investigation. In response, Azerbaijan has cancelled a planned official visit to Moscow and stopped Russian cultural events in Baku. Tensions were already high after an Azerbaijani passenger jet was shot at near Gronsky last year. The plane later crashed while trying to land in Kazakhstan, killing 38 people. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev accused Russia of trying to cover up the tragedy for days. The Kremlin apologized for what it called a tragic mistake, but did not accept full responsibility. Since then, ties between Moscow and Baku have worsened. Azerbaijan's president also skipped Russia's Victory Day parade this year and has moved closer to Ukraine. Despite the latest events, the Kremlin says it wants to keep good relations with Azerbaijan. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Dr. Sergei Dvoryanov, he's the president of IDC Russia and director at WHD International Board, joining us live from Moscow. Thank you for joining us today. How much have recent incidents from the jet shooting last year to the police raids on Azerbaijanis in Russia recently eroded trust between Baku and the Kremlin? Is this a clear signal of worsening ties with Moscow? You seem to be unmute. Okay, yeah. Should I repeat the question?
Yes. No.
Okay.
I got your question. Thank you so much for invitation. I would like to start my interview with a famous quote of Azerbaijan writer Nizami, who wrote that spending your days without a friend is the worst of misfortunes. That's why friendship between our nation, I personally have a lot of Azerbaijani friends. And we can see that Russia is such kind of civilization where we can find Azerbaijan diaspora, any other diaspora, and all of them success. Azerbaijani diaspora is very famous because of the influence, the educated people, they're very active. But as you know, any criminal, they have no ethnic identity. We are not blame any ethnics when we catch criminal. That's why I can see, of course, relationship between our country and between our leaders, like, for example, President Aliyev, the current president of Azerbaijan, is very wise, very experienced politician, very respectable, and he is the son of his father of nation, Mr. Aliyev, who was during USSR one of the most recognized politicians. And we can see personal relationships between Vladimir Putin and President Aliyev was very close and warm, and always when they met each other, it was a real friendship with jokes, with friendship mood. Right now we can see this black cat between our leaders, and it starts with this incident with aircraft, and then of course when we celebrate our anniversary of the victory in the Red Square in Paris, President Aliyev also didn't came. But I'm completely believe that Russia and Azerbaijan will continue our friendship. Nothing will distort and destroy our friendship. That is only like a moment. We can see during the modern history, it was some conflict even with Belarus, with Minsk, with Lukashenko, some misunderstanding between two leaders, Lukashenko and Putin. Sometimes it's happening. We can see even in the family you have some conflicts, but finally all of us were neighbors. We have such kind of achievements. We defeat fascism, Nazism. During USSR, our history was united in one state. That's why I completely believe that definitely for sure we will defeat all these obstacles.
Right. Dr. Sergey, thank you very much for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. One person has died while 3 have been wounded in a Ukrainian attack on Donetsk, according to Denis Pushlin, who is the Russian-appointed head of the region. Pushlin has said that market and infrastructure objects were hit in the attack. Meanwhile, Russia's air defense forces shot down 35 out of 40 Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles in Kyiv's massive attack on the Lugansk People's Republic, according to the region's head. As per LPR's head, Leonid Pasechnik, the entire territory of the Lugansk People's Republic has been 100% liberated. In 2022, between September 23rd and 27th, referendums were held in the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, as well as in the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions. The majority of voters opted to join Russia. On September 30th, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed treaties formalizing their accession. According to reports, there is now speculation that following the liberation of the Lugansk, the Russian military will be tasked to establish a 70 to 120 kilometer deep buffer zone. Meanwhile, the Russian Ministry of Defense has said that its troops attacked the Ukrainian Navy's fuel supplies facilities, production, assembly, and storage sites for attack drones and ammunition depots in the past 24 hours. This comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that a large group of Russian troops were amassing in the Pokrovsk direction, and the region had witnessed multiple attacks with fierce fighting still raging on. Now we go back to our discussion with Dr. Sergey Dvoryanov, who's joining us live from Moscow, Russia. What more can you tell us about the situation that's unfolding, that's intensifying in recent weeks and months we see with between Russia and Ukraine? And is this claimed 100% liberation of Lugansk by Russian-backed forces likely to shift the momentum to maybe wider war, or just harden Ukraine's resolve to keep fighting?
Yes, regarding this, I can say that right now we're very close to the new election of the new president of Ukraine. We're very close to the situation. Everybody understands it. That's why Mr. Zelensky is so active to jump from one country to another country to receive some support. But first question, he should be elected officially. It's a democracy. He put his nation to the pain and war. And before election, he promised his nation that he will stop this war, but he increased this war. This is a karmic reaction, is a karma only. And according to our policy, we can see that we should complete our historical mission. Which mission? We should put justice like a main principle between relationship between any countries. Justice is following to dharma is a universal principle. That's why, of course, we increased our attack to the military objects of the Ukraine army. And it will be continue. It will be even more level. We cannot expect anything more. We should expect when Russia finally will bring peace and support to Russian-speaking population of the eastern part of Ukraine, which before was our country, which before belonged to the Russian civilization. That's why, of course, we should only pray a lot that new election in Ukraine will start soon, only for this.
Dr. Sergey, thank you for sharing that insight. You will stay with us for our next news. Ukraine is taking a major step in countering Russia's growing use of drones on the battlefield. Its defense innovation hub, Brave 1 has launched development of a new type of anti-drone ammunition aimed at helping ground troops shoot down aerial threats. The new round is chambered in 5.56 millimeters, the most common caliber used by Ukrainian infantry. The new ammunition is designed specifically to target and disable low-flying small unmanned aerial vehicles, a growing threat on the battlefield. According to Ukrainian defense officials, the project involves military scientists and domestic arms manufacturers and is aimed at creating a cost-effective solution that can be rapidly deployed. Ukraine's move comes amid ongoing strikes that have damaged infrastructure and claimed civilian lives. By strengthening its drone defense capabilities, Kyiv hopes to protect vital regions and maintain pressure on the front lines. The development underscores how modern warfare is shifting, with drone technology becoming a central part of strategic military planning on both sides. Now we go back to our discussion on this topic with Dr. Sergei Doryanov. Thank you, Dr. Sergei, for staying with us. Now, looking at recent developments coming from Ukraine for this drone, can Ukraine's new anti-drone rounds realistically keep up with Russia's rapidly evolving drone tactics on the battlefield? And does this shift towards infantry-level drone defense mark a turning point in how modern wars will be fought in future?
First of all, I can tell, like a philosopher, like a religion philosopher, unfortunately, today is a modern civilization. We increase technologies, but we use these technologies not to support humanity, but against humanity. And especially this war is a proxy war, which was well organized and designed by the Western Alliance. This alliance pushed Ukraine against Russia with their purpose. They want to extract our resources because Russia definitely one of the richest countries in the world, one of the biggest country in the world, very generous people, very generous nation, always support all other and small nations, always. That's why our generosity is like, you see, this is the main aim of Western Alliance. And right now we can see, of course, is this proxy war, including a lot of new innovations in their defense. But finally, we should understand that morals, most important and moral mission of our country. We, of course, we should to attack Ukrainian army because we want to support Russian-speaking population. That's why, as you know, our country is very famous because of our scientists, because of our weapons, which we supply to different countries, to Africa continent, even to India as well. And our scientists will find the solution. But main solution we should found in the morality, in the moral principles. It's most important. We should not lose our human nature. That's why, like a philosopher, I would like to again and again remind to all our colleagues, please carefully listen interview of our national leader Vladimir Putin to the famous American journalist Tucker Carlson, where during 2 hours he described what was the roots of a Russian-Ukrainian conflict and how we can find solution to bring peace to Ukraine.
Dr. Sergei, thank you so much for joining us today and bringing your expertise as a president of IDC Russia and director of WHD International Board. Now we move on to our next news. An Israeli airstrike on Monday struck a seaside cafe near Gaza City, killing at least 30 people and injuring dozens more, many of them women, children, and journalists. The strike hit Al-Baqa Cafe, one of the few remaining public spaces in the war-torn northern Gaza Strip, where people had gathered for brief relief from the heat and conflict. Eyewitnesses described scenes of carnage and chaos. The cafe was not only a rare recreational place, but also one of the last places in Gaza City with internet access. Here's what the eyewitnesses has said.
فجأة سمعنا اللي انسمع وجينا نجري فجأة لقينا نص شخصيات في البحر، ناس مرمية في البحر، أشلاء.
الناس بتيجي هنا بشكل عام يعني إنه إحنا قاعدين هنا مع بحر، فبتيجي بتغير جو، ترفع عن حالها، بيجوا بيلعبوا شدة، بيقعدوا على النت، بيشحنوا جوالاتهم، وهذا الأمر طبيعي.
Footage from the scenes shows plumes of black smoke, shattered glass, and mangled debris, evidence of the airstrike's destructive force. Israel resumed its military offensive on March 18, and since then, more than 6,200 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, according to health officials. That brings the total death toll since the war began in October 2023 to 56,531 people, with over 133,000 injured. Monday's strike adds to the growing list of attacks on civilian spaces and aid zones, drawing renewed international concerns over the escalating humanitarian crisis in the besieged enclave. Now we are joined by Joshua Barnes for this discussion. He's a correspondent at NewsX World. Joshua, what more can you tell us, and what's latest in the Gaza situation right now?
Yes, absolutely, Asuma. Well, the situation on the ground in Gaza is still a perilous one for the millions of people who are living there. Displacement following a resumption of military action following that brief but holding ceasefire, which did lead to a hostage exchange. The context on this, of course, the October 7th attack of 2023 carried out by Hamas saw the death of thousands of Israelis and hostages taken. A deal had been agreed between Hamas and Israel, but that broke down after the first phase, and following that, fighting has resumed in the enclave. I just want to clarify that this strike that has taken place on this seaside town and on this building is only confirmed by eyewitnesses and by medics on the ground. This hasn't been confirmed by other groups. It is, of course, difficult for journalists to get into the enclave. Access has been restricted, and the death tolls have come out from the Gaza local officials, but these are also questioned as well. I just wanted to clarify that. But the situation is difficult, and conversations have been had around finding a resolve. A US proposal by Steve Witkoff was looking at around a 60-day ceasefire. Further discussions then took place about the aid situation in Gaza, with many deaths now reported around aid facilities. But given the conflict that happened between Iran and Israel and the wider Middle East tensions, Gaza, on a geopolitical standpoint, was not the focus of attention. Now that that has calmed, further work towards a ceasefire is expected to continue. But for those living in the enclave, the situation remains dire. For Israelis, the situation remains dire as well. Hostages, around 50 now, still being held, dozens dead, some still believed to be alive. The situation is a difficult one for all parties involved, but the conflict continues.
Thank you, Joshua. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. On the other hand, tempers flared at the United Nations Security Council on Monday as Palestinian and Israeli representatives spared over the deepening humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the killings of aid workers. Palestinian Deputy UN Observer Majid Bamya urged the Council to support a ceasefire, the release of all hostages and prisoners, and to ensure unimpeded humanitarian aid and Israeli military withdrawal. But Israeli UN Ambassador Danny Danon pushed back hard, insisting that no ceasefire or aid flow can happen until Israeli hostages are freed by Hamas. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
Hamas terrorists murdered clearly identified GHF staff as they were returning from a day of feeding Gazan civilians. Horrible pictures. They stopped the bus, tortured them in the middle of the road, and executed them. The Secretary General said nothing. OCHA, nothing. UNRWA, nothing.
Danon praised the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a US-backed, Israeli-approved initiative for delivering over 46 million meals in just a month, but accused Hamas of executing 5 GHF aid workers earlier this month during a delivery mission. In response, Bamia condemned Israeli airstrikes on aid workers and starving civilians, accusing Israel of creating deadly conditions at distribution sites. Here's what he had to say.
We ask to be treated as human beings. That's not too much to ask. And it is a bit insulting to suggest that we are not entitled to be treated that way, that we should take whatever is thrown our way and be thankful. Speaking about attacks on aid workers, you want to go there? Attacks on aid workers, humanitarian personnel, UN staff? Attacks on aid workers? You spoke,
Colleagues,
you spoke
colleagues.
of Hamas and
When both delegates began talking over each other, Security Council President Caroline Rodriguez Burkett intervened, reminding them to maintain decorum. Now we are joined by Joshua Barnes for this discussion. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this situation, and how fragile is the situation between UN as well as Israel and Palestine?
Well, yes, absolutely. Asuma, the situation between the UN, several charities and NGOs, and Israel has been tense for some time. Before you read out that latest update, of course, I was talking about the Gaza aid centres, and a lot has revolved around this contention over an initial aid blockade, which has led to condemnation from several groups like the UN and factions within the UN, but also charities and NGOs as well. They say that the aid blockade, starvation, humanitarian situation, which they accuse Israel of causing, has led to famine and widespread difficulty in Gaza. A resumption of aid has taken place, but there is still contention around that, and these aid centres which are part of the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a US-backed group, of course the US key allies of Israel. They have been accused of weaponizing aid. These stations accused of being put in confrontation zones, and we have seen conflict and deaths reported around these aid sites. So there is a clear message from certain charities and groups around the situation in Gaza, focusing on aid and focusing on what they call a humanitarian crisis. Israel, in response, refute a lot of the claims that have been coming out. So the situation, though, is still a murky one, a difficult one. Israel allied with the US, and earlier I mentioned as well that condemnation that was coming from within countries that are Western, European nations, as well as Australia and other countries as well across the globe, sort of looking for a response and an end to this fighting. Israel's stance has remained clear since the start of Operations Gideon's Chariot, and that has been that until all hostages are released, until Hamas have been disarmed, disbanded, and not in a position to carry out an attack like the horrific scenes of October the 7th, then they will continue their offensive. Work towards a ceasefire is continuing, though.
Thank you, Joshua Barnes. Now you will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Turkish police have arrested more than 120 City Hall members in the opposition bastion of Izmir, according to local media and the opposition party, Republican Party's People's Party. In total, some 157 arrest warrants were issued in the operation as per local media. The arrests on charges of alleged corruption came after a similar operation in opposition-run Istanbul on March 19 that saw the arrest of its popular mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, the main political rival of Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In Izmir, a former mayor and numerous senior officials were among those detained, according to Murat Bakan, the vice president of the opposition CHP. Bakan has said that these arrests were not a legal obligation but a clear political choice. Bakan also wrote on social media platform X that Tunç Soyer, a former mayor, and Senol Aslanoglu, the party's regional president, were among those detained. Now we are joined back by Joshua Barnes for this discussion. Thank you, Joshua, for staying with us. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this evolving situation in Turkey, and is it dangerous for President Erdogan that these people are? It's not a democracy anymore if these people opposition leaders keep being arrested.
Yes, well, Asuma, first I just want to clarify from NewsX World's position. Of course, we're not commenting directly on whether democracy is still at play in Turkey. What the comments coming from opposition has said is that these arrests aren't, of course, in line with a democratic process. But rather than talking about the arrests and focusing on that, let's provide some context here for you. Ekrem İmamoğlu, who at that point was the mayor of Istanbul, was of course arrested and has been incarcerated for 100 days now, and this at the time around a series of protests over the Erdogan rule, a clear faction there, but of course Turkey, a democratic country, and vote processes have been ongoing. But following Ekrem İmamoğlu's arrest, there were further arrests, over 1,000 people arrested during protests, and it seems that further action is continuing. İmamoğlu, after being arrested, was confirmed as the leader of the opposition and the candidate for the next presidential election. This, of course, while incarcerated, and difficult to see at the current stage how he would be carrying out that process. But questions, as you've rightly said, have been raised by the opposition talking about democracy, a topic that will continue while there is such division. We will wait to see how that carries out, whether there will be further protests, further arrests, and any more discontent amongst rival groups with the Erdogan regime and their methods.
Thank you, Joshua. You will stay with us as we stay on this story. Clashes erupted in Istanbul after a satirical magazine was accused of publishing a cartoon depicting the Prophet Muhammad, sparking outrage, arrests, and a government crackdown. Police fired tear gas and rubber bullets as an angry mob of up to 300 people gathered outside a bar frequented by staff of Liman, one of Turkey's longest-running satirical publications. The arrest followed arrest orders from the Istanbul prosecutor over an image in the magazine's June 26th issue. The cartoon, which circulated widely online, showed two men greeting each other amid an aerial bombardment, one named Muhammad, the other named Musa. Officials claimed it insulted religious values, while the magazine insists it referred to a common name, not the Prophet. Editor-in-chief Tuncay Akgün, speaking from Paris, said the image was not a caricature of the Prophet and warned that authorities had distorted the cartoon to stoke provocation. Turkish police have arrested the cartoonist, the editor, and the graphic designer. Officers have taken control of the magazine's offices in Istiklal Avenue. While arrest warrants have been issued for several other executives, Interior Minister Ali Yerlikaya called the cartoon vile, and Justice Minister Yilmaz Tunç said an investigation had been launched for publicly insulting religious values. Critics of the government say the incident is being used to target press freedom. Liman, founded in 1991, has long been a bastion of opposition satire in Turkey. Editor Tuncay Akgün warned that comparisons to Charlie Hebdo, the French magazine targeted by Islamist gunmen in 2015, were very intentional and worrying. Now we're joined back for this discussion with Joshua Barnes. He's a correspondent from NewsX World. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this situation and what to watch, or what should we watch for from now?
Yes, well, Asuma, this is, of course, a contentious decision and a sensitive issue. Religion in cartoons is something, as you mentioned, that has happened before, and the portrayal of the Prophet Muhammad in this way if taken out of context or if used in a way that is aggressive or unsightly by the magazine and by the paper, could of course cause issues. With how tense this position is, it's unsurprising that there has been an outcry, an action we've seen from Turkish officials with arrests made. Those comments that you just read out there from the editor really sort of setting a stance and setting a tone at a moment of instability for the country. We've just mentioned what's going on politically in Turkey. Religion as well, of course, is a point of contention and in the past has led to conflict. So potential groups within Turkey infighting could have devastating ramifications for those involved. That Charlie Hebdo cartoon, which again allegedly depicted the Prophet Muhammad, led to the fatal shooting in Paris, which saw the death of 12 people. I want to be careful with this because it's difficult to sort of circumnavigate that and not look to draw direct comparisons. The newspaper have looked to distance themselves with the Charlie Hebdo attack, but there are of course parallels, and there will be questions raised about how the magazine were able to go through that process and then publish this image, given the potential uproar it might cause. Further protests could potentially happen, and after those arrests it will be interesting to see what authorities look to do with those they've apprehended.
Thank you, Joshua Barnes. You will stay with us as we move on now to next news. Turkey is battling a wave of raging wildfires with over 50,000 people forced to evacuate from multiple regions, mostly around the western province of Izmir. The fires, fueled by strong winds blowing at speeds of up to 120 kilometers per hour, have destroyed homes and threatened entire communities. The worst blaze began in the forested district of Sefersihisar, southwest of Izmir, where over 42,000 residents had to be moved to safety. Residents were seen creating fire breaks to protect homes, but officials warned that the winds continue to fan the flames. Agriculture Minister Ibrahim Yumakli said over 1,000 personnel are deployed using planes, helicopters, and fire engines to fight the fires. Further evacuations took place in Manisa, Hatay, and northwestern Turkey, affecting thousands more. Meanwhile, authorities have arrested one person accused of deliberately starting a fire in Izmir. Since Friday, 263 wildfires have broken out across Turkey. Most are under control, but 4 remain active. Wildfires have destroyed nearly 19,000 hectares of land so far this year. Climate experts warn that human-induced global warming is driving more intense and frequent disasters like these, and that Turkey must act swiftly to prevent further catastrophes. Let's listen into what Minister of Agriculture Ibrahim Yumakli has said.
Burada birçok canlılar var. Kuşlar var, böcekler var, diğer hayvanlar var. Maalesef şu anda onların bu 12 kilometrelik bir hattan bahsediyoruz. Uzunluk itibariyle 5 kilometrelik bir genişlikten bahsediyoruz yer yer. Burada etkilenen canlılar da var maalesef.
Now we are joined back with Joshua Barnes for this discussion. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this situation in Turkey?
Well, yes, an extremely worrying situation for those in the areas affected by these fires, and as you've mentioned already, fear over them continuing to spread given the severe winds that are at play. Now, this situation of 50,000 homes being evacuated is huge, and it won't just be the logistical efforts to get these people moved and housed away from the danger zone, but also then the clear-up efforts. We've seen recently that wildfires have been causing huge problems across the globe, and those questions over environmental impacts caused by human-impacted global warming continue to be raised. More extreme, more regular wildfires are popping up. We've had them in South Korea, we've had them in the United States and Los Angeles in recent months, but this is a situation for those in Turkey that will be difficult. Families leaving their homes behind and not knowing if they will return to them intact or burnt to the ground. For those there must be apocalyptic scenes on the ground, and we will of course bring you all the updates on those as we get them, as emergency services look to restrict the damage and hopefully stop these fires from spreading and causing more destruction and potential fatalities.
Thank you, Joshua Barnes. Now we move on to our next news. At the 4th UN Conference on Financing for Development in Seville, world leaders gathered under the banner of the Pact for Prosperity, People and the Planet. French President Emmanuel Macron, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, and Kenyan President William Ruto took center stage. Let's hear from French President Emmanuel Macron, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, and Colombian President Gustavo Petro.
So now, neither China nor the US are compliant with WTO. And now a lot of people in the room are starting to say, WTO is not so much meaningful. And now we have the tariffs. But the tariff is just a killer for poor and emerging countries.
So I am happy to announce that Spain will be joining the coalition being launched today to work towards a better contribution of the aviation sector to fair transitions and resilience, with a special focus on applying ticket fees to premium flyers.
Las relaciones de poder, la visión imperial y colonialista del mundo impide a las fuerzas políticas y a los dirigentes políticos del norte encontrar una solución que es sencilla. Europa puede alimentarse de la energía de África. Claro, a bon marché. No a la explotación, no a la esclavitud, a bon marché. De tú a tú.
Now we move on to North America. The man accused of brutally killing 4 University of Idaho students in 2022 has agreed to plead guilty, a move that would spare him from the death penalty. 30-year-old Brian Kohberger is expected to receive 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and will waive his right to appeal. Kohberger was arrested weeks after the attacks at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. He was accused of sneaking into a rented home in Moscow, Idaho, near the university campus, and killing students Ethan Chapin, Zana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kylie Gonsalves. All 4 were stabbed multiple times in their sleep. Autopsies showed some of the victims had defensive wounds. 2 other roommates survived. Investigators identified Kohberger using DNA evidence found on knife sheath at the crime scene. Prosecutors confirmed his lawyers initiated the plea negotiations. A letter to victims' families said this resolution would ensure Kohberger is convicted without years of appeals and legal uncertainty. But the move has sparked outrage. The conclave's family said they were beyond furious at the state of Idaho, claiming the deal was made secretly without their input. A plea hearing is set for tomorrow, but the families have asked for a delay to ensure they can be present. Now we are joined by Joshua Barnes. He's a correspondent at NewsX World. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this evolving situation onto you?
Yes, absolutely. Well, a chilling case of murder. 4 college students knifed to death, and a prime suspect who many believed across the US was almost set for his trial. But this move comes out of the blue, but one that clearly is looking at avoiding the death penalty. That will mean, of course, that this man will spend the rest of his life in jail if that is the case at that plea hearing tomorrow. Just the caveat, we do of course wait for that plea hearing. At the moment, this is just a letter sent in to the courts, and once we have that confirmation, that will be all tied up. Once that guilty plea on all 4 counts plus the burglary count will come through. But this will put an end to a potentially painful trial for the families and friends of those that have been killed, resurfacing all of the information, reliving the tragic deaths of those 4 students. This plea, when it is entered tomorrow, will avoid the death penalty. But as you've mentioned already, some questions raised about whether the due process was given and whether there should have been a trial despite this potential plea hearing. A tragic situation where there will be, of course, that plea hearing and potential sentencing afterwards, but we wait and see for that tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Joshua Barnes. Now we move on to our next news. The Trump administration has accused Harvard University of being in violent violation of the Civil Rights Act, escalating its confrontation with the school even as earlier talks appeared to be moving towards a deal. Yesterday, the Joint Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism sent a letter to Harvard President Alan Garber, declaring that Harvard has violated Title IV of the Civil Rights Act, a law that bans discrimination in federally funded programs. The letter, signed by Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, states that Harvard was sometimes deliberately indifferent and, in other cases, a willful participant in anti-Semitic harassment. It cites incidents of Jewish and Israeli students being assaulted, spit on, and exposed to anti-Semitic imagery and protest encampments. The letter warns that Harvard could lose all federal funding if it fails to act immediately. The task force suggests that losing federal support might actually spur a commitment to excellence. In response, Harvard says it strongly disagrees with the findings. University spokesman Jason Newton says Harvard has taken substantive steps to fight anti-Semitism, including policy changes, disciplinary measures, and new training programs. The report comes just days after President Trump praised Harvard's efforts and said a deal could be announced soon, but talks have recently stalled over disagreements. A White House official said Trump isn't interested in empty promises and insists that Harvard hasn't held up its end of the bargain. White House press secretary has commented on this. Let's listen in.
Well, there was quite a direct letter that was sent to Harvard this morning, as you know. The negotiations are taking place behind closed doors, so I won't comment on that. But what I will share with all of you, for those who haven't seen it, is the context of this letter, because I think it's very important. And this comes from the Department of Health and Human Services, which concluded after a thorough investigation that Harvard University is in a violent violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin. And if you read some of the content of the investigation and what they found, the majority of Jewish students reportedly experienced negative bias or discrimination on their campus, while a quarter of Jewish students at Harvard felt physically unsafe.
Now we're joined by Joshua Barnes. He's a correspondent at NewsX. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this evolving news?
Well, yes, Asuma, this Trump administration versus Harvard conversation has been rolling on for some time, sparked over calls about pro-Palestinian protests, the Trump administration calling Harvard anti-Semitic, also questioning their role with China and threatening against a ban on foreign students with Harvard. The conversation about cutting federal funding has been there for many weeks now, but this, the next step in the Trump administration's move to block that with Harvard. Harvard themselves have called this action silly and said that they are using their First Amendment right to their students, that of course being free speech. But this conversation continues to roll on and debates will be had. Court action has been had, but ultimately the Trump administration are continuing this battle, with Harvard not backing down either. One to keep an eye on.
Thank you, Joshua Barnes. Now we move on to our next news. At least 39 people have died following a powerful explosion and fire at Sigachi Industries chemical factory in southern India. Officials confirmed today the blast, which occurred at the company's plant in Telangana state, also injured 34 workers. Authorities have shut down the factory for 90 days as they begin a thorough investigation. The Telangana government has set up a 5-member committee to probe the incident, but the cause of the explosion remains unknown. Fire disaster response teams are still clearing the debris from the collapsed building, searching for any possible survivors. More than 140 employees were working inside the plant when the blast struck. Sigachi Industries, which produces microcrystalline cellulose used widely in pharmaceuticals, food and cosmetic supplies clients across the globe, including the US and Australia. The damaged Telangana plant accounts for over 25% of the company's total production capacity. The company has reported significant damage to its equipment and buildings and is now filing insurance claims. Following the incident, Sigachi's shares dropped nearly 8%, marking their biggest two-day decline. In a separate tragedy, a massive fire broke out at a crackers factory in Tamil Nadu's Sivakasi cluster, killing 5 and injuring 4 more. This fire adds to a growing number of recent accidents in the region. We have our reporter Raj Kiran, who covers the Hyderabad region, joining us now with a ground report on the situation. Let's listen in.
I'm standing in front of Sigachi, a chemical factory where exactly the accident took place yesterday. The reactor blast has been taken place in Sigachi chemical factory. This is a factory in front of that I'm standing now. We can see how intensity of the blast yesterday, which took place in the morning around 8:30, in between 8:30 to 9:30. This blast has been took place. The reactor has been blasted inside this chemical factory. We can clearly see how the how much is the intensity of the blast, and after the blast which took place inside the factory, till the 100 meters away, this area has been affected. This is the videos of the inside the factory yesterday where exactly the accident took place, and also we can see the containers there where it has totally the building as one side has been collapsed. Still the debris has been taken out from here from yesterday morning around 12 o'clock. The NDRF, SDRF and Singaneri Collieries team has came, a relief team has came, and continuously since yesterday afternoon here the rescue operation is going on. As for the as per the sources, we have the information that around 40 more people has to be identified till now. Only 90 people has been identified. According to the company records in the morning, that 143 people are inside the factory when accident took place. So after that, only 90 people has been got by the authorities here. The NDRF have rescued around 90 people from here, whereas 35 people have died and 35 people are undergoing treatment inside the hospital. So now a big question: where are the more 43 people? More 43 to 53 people who are, whether they are stuck inside or else they have came out. Till now there is no information from the authorities or the factory owners. When we spoke to the victim family, they are saying that till now they don't have any information, and we have seen many dead bodies here, around 35 dead bodies here. Only 10 people has recognized till now. More 25 people dead body has to be recognized. Why? Because after the explosion, massive explosion which took place here, the bodies are unidentified now. More 25 body has to be DNA test has to be conducted. Later the bodies will be handed over to the families. Now here is the big question: where are the 53 people? just 53 people who are still missing. Whether they are inside this company, in between this debris, or else they came out from this factory after the explosion. Here is the big question. The authorities and also the Telangana Chief Minister Revant Reddy have come here and spoke to the authorities and probed a detailed probe on this accident. He has put a detailed probe on this accident, and the authorities already started doing investigations. Investigating is going on. After the investigation, we'll come to know what exactly happened, why this massive explosion has taken place here in this Chian factory. And moreover, Telangana Chief Minister has assured the people who died in this accident, 35 people, from the government side, the government will be giving 1 lakh rupees to the deceased and 50,000 rupees for the people who are undergoing treatment in the hospital. And also, he also said that they have put a demand in front of the company that the deceased people should get 1 crore rupees each. The 35 people till now, the deaths which are showing by the government, 35 people should get 1 crore each, and the 50 lakhs to the people who are injured in this accident. So now the investigation is going on. After the investigation, we'll come to know what exactly happened, what happened, and when it happened. Why? Because we, from the preliminary sources, we got the information that the accident took place at morning around 8:30, in between 8:30 to 9:30. But what exactly happened has still yet known. The investigation is going on. After the investigation, things will be revealed. With camera person Raj Kiran, Sangareddy, Telangana.
Thank you, Raj Kiran. That's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.